I think we're live. Good afternoon, buenas tardes, everybody, LEC community. My name is Edgar Palacios. I'm the co-founder of the Latinx, the founder of the Latinx Education Collaborative. I have some exciting guests with us today. Just want to quickly introduce my co-host for today, Diana Munoz with the Latino Arts Foundation. Hi, Diana. How are you doing?
Hi, good. How are you?
Doing okay. Are you surviving really well, or what's going on in your life right now?
I am. I'm making it through, I think. Online schooling and work.
I totally get it and understand. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. With this, we have two very special guests. We have Dr. Alexis Moreno with Wit and Reason, and then we have Lalo Moreno with Expanding Identities Development. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi. Thank you for having us.
I appreciate you being with us. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about some topics that are important to our community. So I'm going to, before I ask all the questions that I want to ask today, I'm going to just give you the space to kind of let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do. Lalo, you want to start?
Sure. Go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Buenas tardes. My name is Lalo Moreno. My pronouns are they and them. I am the co-founder of Expanding Identities Development, a consulting and training company that works with organizations, nonprofits, and universities to create sustainable organizations for leadership, as we work towards increasing awareness, inclusion, policies, practices of LGBTQ issues, LGBTQ employees, and leaders. This trickles down to the work that we do in high school, middle school, and elementary school, GSAs, and other pride clubs, working on leadership development capacities, organization, time management, things of that nature. And then, of course, all things LGBTQ and forever. I am also the director of the LGBTQ Student Resource Office at Loyola Marymount University, in which I oversee all of the LGBTQ orgs, work with staff, faculty, and students, and do all of the fun programming to increase awareness of our community.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction, Lalo. Dr. Moreno.
Lalo also advises us here at Wit and Reason on LGBTQ matters. So thank you so much, Lalo. Hi, thank you for having me. Wit and Reason is a mental health consulting practice, originally from Los Angeles and now currently based in Washington, D.C., and we go wherever we're needed. We provide individual services, so like telehealth services for therapy and online like coaching, health coaching, wellness, even dating coaching, whatever people need. In addition to that, we work systematically with macro systems, companies, especially like media production companies, studios, to make sure that everyone is on the same page as far as what is mental health, how should it be represented in the media, and in our workplaces, in our schools. And so we do everything we can to make sure that mental health is out there and accessible.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think right now, one of my biggest concerns with the educators that we serve is really their mental health and what they're currently experiencing, the trauma of them not being with their students, the figuring out new ways of interacting socially, or at least connecting with students and whatnot. Deanna, I know that this is also a topic that's very close to your heart. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts or questions that you want to ask first.
Not yet at this time, but I am absolutely loving what both of you do. I think that is so important, and especially when it comes to Latinx. Here in Kansas City, that is something that is so vital and needed. So I just applaud you both for the amazingness, and so I'm excited to hear more about it.
Thank you.
Lalo, what are some of your biggest concerns during this time frame? What's something that's keeping you up at night, and kind of what are you doing to deal with it?
Definitely. There are quite a few things that keep me up at night, but one of the main ones at this point is mainly our trans students in particular, our trans non-binary students, and generally at large, our LGBTQ community, who some of them are going home. They are maybe not out at home. And school was the only place that they could express themselves in that way, or feel seen, or feel heard, or to access resources, and now are in close confines with folks who might not understand them, who might not have the language to be able to communicate with them in that way, or it might not be hospitable. So those would be some of the main concerns. We're also seeing really large issues with trans folks finding and accessing their hormone replacement therapies. So because those are federally controlled, it's only every 2 weeks that they'd have to get a refill, which means that every 2 weeks, regardless of quarantine, they have to go out into the world and get their prescriptions. Puts them at more risk for contracting COVID-19 and things like that. Especially if they are doing these things when they don't have access or resources such as parents or guardians who can drive them, then it makes it even longer. I was just hearing a story from a friend of mine who's in grad school at Columbia, and she had to travel 100 blocks in the thick of Manhattan to go to her pharmacy to get her medication, and that was something that was really, really challenging for her. And then just lack of bodily access autonomy, especially during this time. So those are a couple of big broad-based things. And then as we also see, big things are going on with COVID-19, but also a lot of laws are getting passed in different states right now, kind of under the wire because people aren't paying attention as much because we're dealing with all these other things. So some of those things are also a little concerning and keeping an eye on.
Appreciate that, Lalo. Dr. Moreno, what are your thoughts? What's keeping you up at night?
Yeah, Lalo, I appreciate you bringing up all those things. I mean, we know the regular rates of suicidal ideations and loss of life to suicide, specifically in the transgender community. 41% of transgender and gender nonconforming adults had attempted suicide. And that was in 2014, like the most available percentage that they had. And those were under normal circumstances. So now that Lalo's bringing up all of these extra environmental stressors that could be enhancing someone's feelings of hopelessness and despair, depression, those are some of the things that are really concerning to me. Suicide, mental health, depression, anxiety, and then especially those suffering from substance abuse issues and unable to go get proper treatment because we just need to stay at home for this current time.
I appreciate you bringing up those points. What are some of your recommendations during this time for students in particular that may not have any other outlets to express who they are, their identity? What are some of the tips and techniques that you might provide educators for helping them navigate, the students navigate this environment, this kind of new landscape that we're in for the moment? And I'll shoot the question to either you, Dr. Moreno, or Lalo.
I'm curious about what Lalo has to say as far as identity.
Yeah, definitely. It has been quite amazing to see digital methods of community building. If you think of, I mean, I'm from the generation that grew out of AOL. So that was my first interaction with another queer person, another Latinx person. And they were like way out in like Idaho somewhere. So we grew out of this digital space because we had no physical spaces. So this is almost kind of a coming home for those who actually do have access, and not all of our students have access to this resource. So that's something that's also really precarious. But speaking for the folks who do have that access to digital resourcing, to their phones, tablets, technology, there are plenty of universities right now who have open Zoom meetings or open Google Hangouts that are now also allowing youth from high schools and middle schools to start joining, because we realize that maybe those schools do not have the access or the materials to be able to put on these live webinars and things like this. So we have open spaces at this point. Digital methods of community have been something that are really near and dear to my heart. As someone who's also super introverted, sometimes being out in queer spaces could be really stressful, right? There's lots of music, there's sounds. I'm a neurodivergent person, so that's already really stressful. So we're actually seeing a lot more folks come out of the woodworks than we otherwise wouldn't see, who would come to a physical event for, History Month or something like that. My best recommendation would be to provide those resources if you can, or those spaces. Maybe messaging out newsletters or best practice tips on working with parents or transferring back home, especially as a lot of our students are spending a lot more time there than they normally are used to. So different tips and tricks, such as if we do have our webinars open, a general best practice. I was on a Zoom call yesterday with a student, and we were having a group chat meeting, and one of our students had a big rainbow flag in the background. And she had mentioned, she's like, anyone, let me know if you need me to pull this down really quick in case your parents pass by, and things like that, because then they'll see this giant rainbow and maybe that'll out you. So things that are in your background or in your periphery, usually we say more rainbows, the better. But now that we're entering people's homes, that might not be the safest thing for them. So we want to increase as much of that time and space that they have with other people as possible. Even if it is sending funny memes to your students, if you're allowed to do that, or if you have an email message to send to them, just let them know that you're thinking about them. Right now, they are all just trying to finish this semester and trying to do so with all of their mental health intact. So programming isn't one of the things at the forefront of their mind, but having those connection pieces are important too. I'm hearing a lot of students request positive statements, positive imagery in our Instagram feed or in our stories. That's the main way that students are communicating right now. They've done away with email and they are just direct messaging me at this point, asking for things. So I did a poll. I was like, what do you need from me? What resources can I provide for you? And most of them were just like, let us know it's going to be okay. Give us positive messages. So I did a whole search, and I had a little team of students do a search on cutie poxo, queer, trans, people of color, artists who would create these beautiful pieces. And I can definitely share some of those resources with y'all, and some artists who are doing amazing work right now. Especially in the Latinx community. They seem to be corralling and creating this content because we know that oftentimes isolation breeds a lot of those mental health communities. So those are just a couple, but I have many more ideas.
Those are fantastic. I really appreciate your suggestion around positive messaging too. I'm seeing that a lot of our students that we know of and we're talking to are feeling really isolated first and foremost. They're feeling really disconnected to the community. And I think the expectation, actually, one of the surprises that I've seen from our educators is that they're really intrigued by the fact that this is a generation, particularly Gen Z, who's already used to connecting virtually, who's already used to doing a lot of the video stuff and that way, but they're also missing that interpersonal interaction. And so those positive messages I know go a long way. So I appreciate those suggestions, as well as being cognizant about your surroundings and your environment, and being aware that not everybody is still navigating their own identity spaces and figuring out how to move forward and being conscientious of that. So I appreciate those suggestions.
And especially in Latinx communities, and we see that a lot more with our Latinx community at all the spaces that I work with. But right, family is around, like they are around you at all times. Of our community, like there are some family structures that like their kids are not allowed to have their Zoom calls anywhere but the kitchen, and that's just where they have to be, or they're like cooking dinner with their family and they're trying to have this meeting and go to class, and some of those memes are very true of like being Latinx and trying to take classes at home. But just being mindful of some of those things, or maybe being able to switch the content or what you're talking about,
right.
But checking in with folks, and always headphones if they're available.
Good suggestion. I'm glad I'm doing best practices here, modeling the way.
You're already on it.
Dr. Moreno, what are some suggestions you may have?
Yeah, to add to what Lalo was saying, the checking in piece, I've noticed that there's a habit. I mean, we have so much going on right now. We're trying to navigate a lot while also catching up on everything we've missed while trying to navigate everything. And so a lot of our meetings tend to be really task oriented. So creating that space, that time and space to be able to check in with your students and with your colleagues, with each other, about how are you doing? How are you feeling? How's your family doing? Just so that way they know that this is an okay space to also process, like reflect and process everything that's going on, and allowing them that time to be able to vent if they need to with some of their frustrations, or to express some of the concerns or thoughts or worries that they're having just alone in their heads. Being able to get it out to a trusted adult is going to be incredibly crucial right now and really helpful for them.
Again, that human connection and the ability to reach out. I think a lot of us don't know how privileged we are with the ability to have people that we connect with on a regular basis. And so, again, a great call out and suggestion to make sure we're checking in with folks, particularly those that we may not be used to checking in with for whatever reason. But Absolutely. Deanna, what are some of your thoughts right now? What's going through your brain?
I am just wow. I want to see, is there a way to even bring something to Kansas City? Like, this is something that at least I know with the youth that I work with and personally really need this type of outreach. Some of them don't even have it at school, and it's just a missing link when it comes to Latinx. So is there like an outreach that you guys have or something that you expand beyond the city you're in?
Yeah. For Wit and Reason, we do things virtually, or we could fly in and go do what we need to do. We go in person. So we do have interactive virtual hangouts, webinars, trainings as well, either virtually or in person. So I would love to be able to offer that kind of mental health piece to it. I know Lalo does a lot too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, digital work is my favorite, as I mentioned. And it just so happens that most of my work with students tends to be digital or digital media as a form of storytelling and representation is a lot of work that we do. With EID, with Expanding Identities, we do mainly in-person connections and do trainings like that. But because of my love of all things digital and platform, we have always opened up our doors. We do notice that there's a lot of places, Kansas City being one of them, that we do have folks who read our newsletters and one or two people, but that there is interest across the nation, and there are resources in your local neighborhoods. So there's probably an LGBT center of some sort or something like that. I can definitely send you more specific resources because I have one that's state. And it's color coordinated.
Awesome. Is it in a Google Sheet too, or no?
Oh, yes.
Fantastic. Awesome.
But we also do a lot of digital connections. So anything that we would do in a high school or middle school club, or even with our universities, we can do now via Zoom in these ways, or we can do via our Instagram. And so those are some ways that we're connecting. But for more formal trainings, workshops, how do you organize yourself now that you're, essentially working from home as a student, right? What does time management look like? How does you as a young queer leader look supporting your peers at this point in time? How are you taking care of yourself, right? And then also, how do you combat this need to be overproductive, especially during this time when it's definitely not normal? And so we do a lot of those digital workshops, a lot of those digital narrative buildings. Right now, the most popular one is digital zine making. So we're making digital magazines of your story during this time. And how have you changed during all of this? And what is important to you? And then if with permission, we broadcast that to our student newsletter, and everyone gets to share and comment and see each other's works. And it just reinvigorates this idea that, we might be in our own homes, but we are all still very, very much connected.
Absolutely. I love that. And ours are artists, so a lot of poets and visual artists. So I think they would absolutely love that idea of, especially the zine. I think that's incredible.
We have had some community members do the first digital drag show ever has just occurred about a week or so ago, and it had drag artists from around the world, which you can do digitally. And so, because that is also a community that is facing a lot of economic hardship. So we have a queer open mic that we're doing as well. So if we've got our poets, that would be something that they would love to engage in.
So for some of our older folks like myself, what's a zine?
Well, a zine is just a shortened, more radical version of a magazine. It's usually like handcrafted. So whereas a magazine is polished and proper and very tidy looking, a zine would be kind of a collage, cut and paste, messy kind of thing. You could pull in newspaper clippings or memes and print them out. We're doing digital ones now, me because I'm very concerned about trees, but also as we look towards this digital way of connecting. So we had a student do one for Valentine's Day, and it's basically like a booklet that's this sized, and there's like a little digital one that you can swipe through, like a PDF as well, that they had hand drawn and then just scanned and then turned into this little magazine, and that talked about the exploration of butch on butch love and talking about that exploration of identity through Valentine's Day, which is a little bit more heteronormative than some of our other students get to see. So kind of just increasing those narratives. So zines are kind of just a Mod Podge version of like an actual magazine, but that reflect more on identity, yourself, and telling the story.
I appreciate that. For me, I'm not as cool as some other folks, and so therefore, it takes me a little bit longer to understand what's going on. Just quickly, just want to shout out the community. Delia says hello. Delia Perez Solorzano, one of our educators, is watching us. By the way, I would like to do a quick shout out to I think you have a family member here in Kansas City that connected us. Is that right?
That's our 2 followers.
We have Yvonne, who's one of our educators as well. I believe she's on as well. So hello. And then Lydia, one of our folks, says, we'll have to make a zine ASAP. So I'm going to be exploring what a zine is, and maybe we can do that something in collaboration with the Latino Arts Foundation, Deanna. Yeah,
that'd be great. I'd love that.
That'd be really cool. So let me ask you this from an organizational perspective. So we use the term Latinx, and even though we get a little feedback around the term Latinx, which I understand and I appreciate, at the same time, I think the term Latinx allows us to elevate the voices of those in our community that are often marginalized or that are often not elevated into, I guess, what I would call mainstream spaces or voices. And so for our organization, we try to lead from a place of equity and a place to a commitment from to social justice. What are some of the issues that you see organizations grappling with in terms of the LGBTQIA plus community? Some of the things that you wish you could get out to folks that they would be understanding of as we all learn how to navigate this environment?
Definitely. I think in particular right now, as we look at Latinx, we look at a support for our non-binary communities who might not really identify with Latino, Latina. That is definitely an ongoing conversation with our Office of Chicano, Chicana, Latina Student Services at LMU. It is ongoing. Right, that people are they hold on to it, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
But being intentional about why we're using language, I think, is a really big indicator. Being intentional about the purpose behind it, who's impacted, what are our intentions, and trying to make those things mirrored as much.
Oh, may have froze.
Uh-oh.
I could continue though.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think you may have heard Lalo and I have a DC radio show here where we talk about mental health issues, and I bring on special guests. And Lalo was one of my guests on one of our shows talking about LGBTQ 101. And a big part of the conversation was just language, and especially focusing in on those fun pronouns. And I myself am still forgetting to, when I introduce myself, it's Dr. Alexis, pronouns she and her. And it does take some time to go ahead and adapt that into your regular language. And you're starting to notice that companies are coming together and really working on that to the point where, like, in their signatures, you'll see people's names and then their pronouns right next to it. Hey, Lalo.
Hi.
Welcome back.
I was continuing on the conversation about the use of pronouns and how it takes some practice to try to really adapt it into your language, and how companies are starting to support that in different ways, in little things like updating your signature in your emails to include your pronouns.
Mm-hmm.
Why are pronouns important? Why is it important for organizations who want to be inclusive, who want to lead from a space of equity, utilize pronouns and incorporate that in their communications?
Lala. Pronouns are like my soapbox. I love a pronoun. I love a conversation about pronouns. So a big majority of pronouns it's a way that we respect one another. Everyone has the right to be referred to and named in however way they feel, right? It is not customary for us to refer to people outside of their names, right? Like, I would not call my sibling anything other than her name or the other names that she has mentioned that is okay for me to refer to her as, right? And the same goes with our pronouns. It is a way of showing respect. It is a way of honoring that person's identity, right? Even if you don't agree with it, even if you don't understand it, it is about that respect piece. And I know that especially in our Latinx community, respect is incredibly integral, just as it is in all of our communities, but particularly how we refer to each other makes a really big difference. And so if I am a student and I am seeing that someone has their pronouns in their email, or they address themselves with their pronouns when introducing themselves to me, I know that they know what's up, and I might feel a little bit more comfortable in the near future once I build that relationship with them to share. Also, offering the opportunity and normalizing it is another big part of this process. One of my favorite allies of all time, and he does this on his own accord, and not everyone has to do it to be a great ally, but he, as a cisgendered male, will always say his pronouns in meetings forever, along with his introduction. And I remember the first time he had done it, because usually it's me alone saying my pronouns. I'm the only one. Right? It's usually the person who doesn't mirror mainstream society, who has to then divulge more. And I do that as a practice because I want to make sure that people refer to me in the right way. But he also does it as a way to normalize the process. Anyone can share their pronouns, and that we shouldn't be making assumptions as to like who's normal and who looks the way that their pronouns should be. It's also a larger conversation on how do we consistently look at people as authentic and intrinsic individuals, right? Not making assumptions about them or about their identities, and providing them the space and the agency to label and determine for themselves how they'd like to be referred. And I think especially as we work with youth, especially the littlest ones, giving them more agency in that way provides them with this like brightness, like they didn't know that they had an option to name themselves. And it kind of gives them that ownership of themselves and of their identities as they continue to explore that. But also feeling valid in who they are and what their experience is, right? And so those would be just a couple of things. So thank you for bringing up pronouns while I was away. Pronouns in our emails. One of the common questions I get is, well, how do I like ask people's pronouns? So I'll usually just go first. I'll say like, hi, my name is Lalo Moreno. My pronouns are they and them. How may I refer to you today? That gives them all the agency in the world to determine who they would like to be with me. Then I would always ask, is it okay if I refer to you in this context outside of this room? Can I talk to other professionals about you with this name or with this pronoun? Because we also want to be mindful that they might be comfortable in my office. They might not be comfortable elsewhere.
It's just a new habit to form, really.
Yeah. After 3 weeks becomes a habit.
Yeah. And so that's why I appreciate that your organization has the X in there, because it's, it really just kind of cuts out all that nonsense. As far as like adding the O and A, and it just seems much more inclusive to me.
I appreciate that, and I think from our perspective, using the term and naming an organization Latinx Education Collaborative, it's a journey in itself, because identity is something I think all Latinx folks struggle with, right? I think that we are an incredibly diverse community. We are not one and the same at all, and we absolutely have different opinions and beliefs, and we were raised differently and all these other things, right? And so the term Hispanic or Latino, I also have some issues with, because like it's not fully comprehensive of all of our identities. And so I understand the pushback and I can accept it, because I think to your point, like everybody has a right to identify as they are and as who they are. But from our perspective, using the term Latinx is not it doesn't exclude other terms. It's just really a recognition of the fact that like we are welcoming of everybody, regardless of what intersectionality points you may have. So I appreciate that, and I'm glad that we have some. The term has some fans out there, because sometimes it feels like we're losing the battle there, but we're going to keep pushing on it.
With more to do. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I serve as a board chair of the Latino Arts Foundation, and Deanna and I were actually just talking about the type of training that we might want to do with our board members around LGBTQIA plus community members and folks who identify as such. What are some suggestions for organizations that are delving into that kind of work, into understanding the community from a different perspective?
Well, you do.
Well, we would probably start.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. It broke up a little bit for a second.
Oh no.
I think the Wi-Fi in LA is like crazy right now. So
I know. It is. I'm in Koreatown, so we're a very densely populated area. So there's like Wi-Fi on top of each other. Yeah, it's a lot. But thank you for bearing with me. Yes, so generally we want to start with a common language. That's the best practice right now, is just ensuring that everyone comes to the table with the same language, the same ability to communicate, the same community agreements. And then also kind of unpacking maybe some of the things, the implicit biases that we have taken on over our time, just being human people in the world, receiving messages, cultural messages, and broad-based messages as well. So our first trainings would usually look a lot like that. It would be a big bunch of vocabulary terms, which we turn into a fun game, if you're down for games. As we're all educators, I love a game. So we do play like a vocab game. We talk about stereotypes. We talk about implicit biases in our first meeting. We talk a lot about community agreements. How do we hold space? What does that look like? But also coming from a space that everyone here is trying to learn with best intention, that we don't often know what we don't know. And so we're not passing judgment in those spaces. And that's what makes our trainings, I think, really pivotal for folks, is that it's the first time that they've had a chance to say something that maybe they've heard, or that they're a little, ashamed of, or they feel guilty about, but that, someone who is in the community can hear them, can listen. I've been doing these trainings for the better part of a decade at this point, and I have heard it all. I've worked with elementary school kids who have no filter, and middle school kids. Especially playing the stereotype game. Like, they hold no bar. Like, they are just ready with the stereotypes. But unpacking them and seeing, where do these things come from? How do we address them? What are our best practices moving forward? And then common language. So those would be some of the main things that we would start with. And then we can kind of start getting into gender identity and the breakdown between sex and romantic attraction and sexual attraction versus, gender expression, and then slowly delve deeper into the rich, very confusing content of queer theory.
With lots of fun and games.
Lots of fun and games. There are buzzer sounds.
And visual aids, because we're all different learners, huh?
I'm a haptic learner, so I need all the things to be happening at the same time for me to learn.
So what I would add to that is getting the opportunity for all of your team members to really reflect on their personal values. You'd be surprised how much that takes kind of a toll on our interpersonal relationships when one person is raised a certain way and holds certain values internally. And we tend to kind of expect that of others. And they have a totally different perspective or value set than we do. And then there's a lot of clash in the workplace or in organizations because we're not meeting each other's unspoken expectations. So having that kind of sit down talk of okay, what are our values? And there's tons of different ones. There's a value card game that we play with people to help people figure out, okay, what are some of my top values and how might this look in the workplace or when we're working on a team together. And then another piece that we look at as far as intersectionality and culture is having everyone work on a genogram, which is kind of like a family tree. Have you guys heard of those before? Yeah, so you have the circles and squares or any other shape that you want to use. And then you really map out your family structure, and then you incorporate all these different levels of messages that you got from people, the values, the rules, automatic thinking and belief systems, and then how all of that makes you who you are, and how that portrays in the work that you do and how you interact with others. And learning about each other in that deeper way can really help an organization both bond better together and then be able to understand each other better as they move forward in working with one another.
And I think one of the issues.
Oh, what was that?
Sorry, one of the issues, not issues, but I think one of the things that comes up, especially when as an organization, the LGBTQ community is very, very important to us, and especially the Latinx. So I think sometimes when we're talking about it, people will be like, well, you're an organization, so you're automatically, it's okay just to include them, But what we're trying to do is have them not feel like, they walk in, they're like, okay, I see other people like me, but I'm not seeing people like me, I'm not seeing a reflection of that. And I feel like sometimes, others may just think just because we're Latino, that everybody's included in it, and that and that it's always going to be that way. And I feel like, how do we help the people in our organization know that, yes, we include everybody, but we need to ensure that certain groups, especially like the Latinx group, feel very welcome here and safe, and that we have programming that isn't singling them out, but they're also feeling inclusive. But there's also, I don't know how to say it correctly, but do you kind of understand what I'm going with a little bit?
Yeah. So I have thoughts on that.
Okay.
I'm sure Lalo wanted to jump in. So there's a big difference between meeting numbers and quota, and even having a seat at the table, but actually being heard and respected and valued while you're at the table.
Right.
And I've experienced that in my professional life. Unfortunately, I've seen that kind of played out. And unfortunately, even though you do get that seat at the table, there's still the extra steps of having to advocate for yourself, and making sure that your voice and thoughts and opinions are heard and valued. And so there's some areas where you see that struggling, where people are there, but they're overlooked. Their ideas aren't even really considered. They're minimized. They're kind of pushed to the side. And then you see organizations where people are, where it's inclusive and included. So everyone's very much valued for their individuality, for their culture, for their background, even across the Latinx board. I mean, you're going to get a big variety because we all come from different homes and cultures as well within our own community. So really valuing that by asking for each person's thoughts and ideas about whatever decisions are being made, or program ideas you guys are going to launch next. That's makes a huge difference from that passive kind of inclusion, that active inclusion.
I appreciate the distinction between passive inclusion and active inclusion. And I think that's something, Deanna, that I think comes naturally to me, but also you have to be very thoughtful and conscientious about learning your own biases and what you bring to the table, and then be willing to make better decisions once you know those biases. And so you said a lot of things that really kind of resonate with me. First and foremost, representation absolutely matters. That's something that we talk about in our organization, and that's something that we believe in order for our students to become leaders, the leaders that they want, they can be. They absolutely see themselves reflected in the teachers who serve them. So that's part of the work that we do. But being at the table and also having your voice heard, that's a whole nother step, right? Yeah. And being part of a community that gives you the space to hold your thoughts and your opinions and to not devalue because of them, that's something that we also try to work with districts and other organizations to say, like, listen, we want to help you recruit Latinx educators to the fold, but your environment has to be well prepared. You have to be willing to have difficult conversations, and you have to be willing to learn and make mistakes, because I don't think we all have all the answers all the time around, what's the best way to show active inclusion. But if there's a space for us to hold conversations and hold people's opinions together and bring them together, I think that's incredibly important. So thank you for that. And I think, Deanna, we have some work to do to make sure that we are creating a space that is actively inclusive. I'm going to use that term from now on, the combinations of those words, because I think it really is a great distinction around we're inclusive, but we're also actively working on improving our inclusivity.
Yeah, and the voices. And Edgar, I appreciate that you mentioned, everyone has their own biases and we don't know what we don't know. I think Lalo mentioned earlier. And with all of this comes a level of humility, not humidity, that's coming soon, next month, here in DC, but a level of humility, multicultural humility. There's been this transition in psychology from multicultural competence, which the message was always, you can never be competent, you're always learning. And it's shifted to having this space of humility where it's like, we're not going to know everything of every person's life and experience and perceptions of the things that we say incorrectly by accident, but having that openness to have those conversations and talk about like, oh, did, you mentioned something that was offensive to me, especially those microaggressions.
Right.
Or you did something, and being able to have that level, some level of trust and rapport there where you can have those types of conversations, and that it's a safe space to talk about those things without worried about being fired or something,
I'm now using two terms that I'm going to be moving forward with, like one, active inclusivity, and then multicultural humility. I think that, what a fantastic way to like create the space for people to be wrong, but also understanding that we can improve and we can be better and we can learn. And so I really like the kind of like the growth mindset around multicultural humility. We have a fan, I would say, Hurston Fells. Just some comments. Perceived ethnicity and cultural identity often get confused, so I see the term as endearing and considerate. I think he's referring to Latinx. Loves the conversation, by the way, and he mentions that also inclusion is not just existence, but empowered and accepted presence. And so appreciate those comments, Hurston. Thank you so much for joining us today. Lalo, any thoughts? I believe in equity of voice as well. So.
Yeah, I think also, and a good majority of what we're both speaking to is just rebuilding trust. We are undoing generations, a millennia of belief systems, and it's not going to be easy. It's going to be messy. It's going to be complex. It's going to be a little uncomfortable. And it's going to take a lot of trust in us and in our community members, a lot of trust that we can learn together, that we can co-facilitate a space where we can all learn and grow, that we can unpack some of the things that we have held to be true for so long, but no longer know why. And to really imagine a space in which we can exist together and that represents all of us, right? In our uniqueness and in our brilliance, that honors our lived experience, that connects us back to things that are important to us, but with real intentionality as to why that is, right? I am always really critical of inclusivity for inclusivity's sake, but that's really thoughtful about what this is about and what the purpose is, right? And if this needs to be an exclusive space, if so, why, right? And if we are going to refer to people in this way, why? And just really thinking through this level of trust and understanding, right? That at our core, we are all people who are trying to exist in this space, who are trying to feel seen and heard and loved and cared for. And really, at the end of the day, that's what our students are looking for too. And they are able to see in us as models, right? Showing them that we're human, that we are muddling through, that we might not have a clear direction, but we are trying together. And they see those things. They pick up on the little nuances of how we talk to each other and how we problem solve. And a lot of that is showing them that it's okay to trust other people, even if we might not always come from the exact same space, even if we might not come from the exact same mind frame, from the same exact educational background.
Right.
We're working together to really try and create something where we can all be present and seen.
Can I ask you a question? Because I have dealt with some folks who, kind of back to your comment around exclusive spaces. Can you talk a little bit about the power of affinity groups and affinity spaces, and why they're so important, particularly when we lack those spaces in, I guess, white dominant professional environments?
Yeah, definitely. As a person who works at a predominantly white institution, I can talk a lot about this. And one of the conversations that we have a lot is, well, shouldn't all spaces be inclusive and we should all be there? And that's wonderful, right? But once again, intentionally inclusive. What is the purpose of the space? Who are we serving and why? For a lot of underrepresented communities, there hasn't been a space for us to just be with others whom are like us as well. There's plenty of space for us to exist and be comfortable and to learn from others and who have different experiences, but the intrinsic value of connecting with someone just for a moment who you don't have to explain things to, even if it's just for an hour, is what I notice that students really love and appreciate. And also just my peers, my colleagues, when we all get together. that there are, jokes and things that we can talk about that make sense to us. There is a conference called Blackout, and it's for Black queer folks only. And so if you are not Black identified, then you are welcome to see the webinars, but those physical spaces are reserved for Black queer folks specifically. And I remember when I had registered students, I felt contentious about it at first, and I really had to sit and think, were there spaces for me outside of this that I could go to and be with just people who reflected parts of my identity, that would understand components of it, that there didn't need to be this performative understanding of the space. There didn't need to be an explanation, and that I should also fight to protect those spaces for folks who are outside of my group, that they can have them as well. Right, as a good ally, because even in the LGBT community, I'm an ally to my non-binary brothers and sisters and siblings, and my trans folk, and our Black trans women as well. Right, the allyship looks different, and so if I want to ensure space for me and my community, then I'm going to ensure space for others. And having that space to just exist without it being a learning lesson for someone else, without it being a learning lesson for you. I mean, there are plenty of opportunities to learn. Sometimes there are very few opportunities to just be in space and in community. And that can be incredibly healing and powerful. And some really amazing things can actually come out of those spaces too.
I appreciate that so much. I love that statement. Like, it's not a space to learn, it's a space to be. And that distinction is key for a lot. Back to mental health, right? To sanity, being sane for a little bit, to escape the realities of life and be able to be supported by peers that are similar to you. I think that's fantastic. I appreciate you explaining it that way. Dr. Moreno, I think that's...
Oh man, I didn't realize, on a personal note, I didn't realize how much I needed that until I moved to Washington, DC. It was quite a culture shock for me. And I naturally had that space with my family, or just being around LA, and moving out to DC. Mexican Americans are like the minority of the minority, which was very different from my upbringing in LA. So it wasn't until I didn't have that space anymore when I realized, oh no, this is really valuable. And I've been here for a little over 4 years now, and I'm still looking for it. So thank you, Lalo, for reminding me of this valuable space to just be. I'm going to keep on looking.
We have roughly 5 minutes left in our conversation. I've been dying to ask you this question. And it's probably a hard question to answer. So here we go. What does good allyship look like?
It was a fun one.
I know a lot of people who deem themselves allies, who are very committed who are very committed, and would love to hear your perspective on what good allyship looks like.
I asked Lalo the same question on our radio.
All the time. That is one of my favorite questions to answer, other than gender being a social construct, which is probably my favorite. But allyship looks different for everyone and for every community. So even as a person, regardless of all my identities, right, I'm an ally to folks regardless of their involvement in the LGBTQ community. I'm an ally to other Latinx leaders. I am an ally to Black leaders as well. I am an ally to mental health professionals, right? Don't totally always do the things that y'all want to do and explain it in the way that mental health professionals do, but I'm an ally to that work. And that looks a lot of different ways. There's being an upstander as opposed to a bystander, right? We can upstand and be that person in the room who is bringing forth the questions that maybe other folks who don't have the power or the agency to answer or to advocate for themselves. We can be really mindful, thoughtful, introspective about our own biases and really hold ourselves accountable. Not that we're bad people, it's just that we have these thoughts that, are inherent in our society, and that's okay. And providing ourselves that grace, but also continually trying to learn. So a good ally, right? I think there's also, gradients, but a good ally would be someone who is consistently trying to learn, trying to understand, who's holding themselves accountable and holding space for others, and really not making others validate their experience or their identity in any way, shape, or form, just accepting it, right? Just like you would want someone to accept you for who you are. But also asking the community what they need and never taking the mic from them. I explain this to some of our white queer students in particular, and especially our cis students, our cisgender students who, you know, are of the community but don't understand some of these other intrinsic components to it and the levels of identity that compound and how much pressure that can put more identities that you have. And so I will always tell them, you know, being an ally about my name at the front of this book or at the front of this webinar or whatever. My job is to be relatively silent. My job is to use my privilege to kick this door down so that other people who don't have that privilege can come and take the stage. That is not my stage to have, right? This is for other people. And I think a good ally always really thinks about what they can do with their privilege to amplify and center the voices of folks who don't have those privileges, and always consistently works to figure out what they could be doing more of, giving them self-grace, and then also taking on some of the burdensome labor that, you know, we just don't have the energy to do, right? Because you have that privilege of not having to do that labor all the time. And so in a broad-based way, someone who always wants to learn, someone who's critically engaged and challenging, someone who's thoughtful, kind, and intentional, and then someone who is also trying to make that stage happen for someone that they claim to be an ally for.
That was pretty concise and incredibly powerful, so I appreciate that.
Concise is never something I've been called before, so that's great.
Dr. Moreno, any thoughts on what good allyship looks like?
That pretty much sums it up.
Okay, cool. Wow.
I will just emphasize the research piece. Something that Lalo mentioned to me before that I think is really crucial is that, you know, the person who you're trying to be an ally for shouldn't be your sole person that you're asking all these questions of, because then you're just asking them to do more emotional labor for you. Go out and do your own research. And Lalo has a list of resources that are approved online that are useful information. And then we've also provided a list of things on witandreason.com just for our educators specifically on how can you be that person, that advocate, that safe space for your students, regardless of what they're going through, mental health issues, LGBTQ matters, stressors outside the home or in school or in the home. I mean, there's a lot to learn. And as an ally, it's your responsibility, as Lalo mentioned, to continue learning those things and don't just rely on the people who you're trying to support to do that for you.
Yeah.
And if you decide to ask them questions, right, a good ally, like my friend the rabbi from LMU, he wanted to ask me many, many questions about my gender identity. He's like, I realize that that's going to take a lot of labor and emotion from you. So can I feed you? And will that be a fair exchange? Like, right. So offering something. He like brought me a muffin and then he was like, I'm going to take you to lunch. And so like, right, that labor is being exchanged because it's often unrecognized labor, especially queer femmes of color often tend to do more so. And, you know, those aren't stipended. So give them a muffin. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And reciprocate.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. You know, I think I'm one who's naturally inquisitive, and I definitely have a lot of questions. And sometimes I don't realize the impact that those questions have. And I think a lot of times when we talk about equity work and these conversations, you know, we think about intent versus impact, and the intent might be good, but we don't realize like the kind of effect that questions may have, folks. And so I appreciate that exchange of, are you, first of all, it's permission, right? Are you willing to talk about this? And then two, like, allow me to do something in return that benefits you in a way that you feel that like it was a good exchange. So I appreciate that. Deanna, since we're coming around time, any thoughts, concerns, questions that you may have of our guest?
Oh no, I am just trying to, you know, gather all the information because you gave a lot of great information, and especially around being a better ally, the inclusiveness, just so many things that our own organization can take back and learn from, and really help and support, you know, all communities that we're serving better. So I appreciate it so much.
And by the way, Dr. Moreno, you mentioned that you had a link. So we posted that link on our Facebook comments. So if you have any well, there's some resources available there, and we'll go ahead and send that out to our community as well. So I appreciate you sharing that. Our final question before we kind of sign off here, what can we as a community, what can we as community citizens, members of the community, do to support you and your work?
Ooh, I like that question. So we're siblings and we're like, ooh. Same mannerisms. Following us on the social medias, as my students will say, at EI Development, and then I'm sure you all will send out fun links and things. And check out what resources and information we have. Feel free to reach out to me, to direct message us. I am the main social media person, so if you're talking to someone, it's usually me. But if you have any questions, things like that, I usually kind of corral them and turn them into like a story of posts, of responses. But follow us, let us know if there's anything that you need. And I think also the best allyship, the best thing that y'all could do right now is take care of yourselves, so that you can take care of your peers, that you can take care of your students. And that is definitely how you can help us, because you are the people who are on the ground where you're at. And so just let us know what you need.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Same. Social media, I'm not a fan, but it is needed. So follow, subscribe, like at Wit and Reason on all of the things ever. We also have a podcast. We have a radio show that we then turned into a podcast. It's Wit and Reason. You can find that on Apple iTunes. And there's a special show with Lalo and I, LGBTQ 101. So make sure to subscribe and give us little stars and reviews and stuff.
I love it.
Let us know all right.
Well, thank you so much. I truly enjoyed this conversation. This is a new way for us to engage our community. And one thing that we promised our community was that we would connect them to Latinx leaders locally and nationally. And so I feel like we've done that today. Phenomenal information, some great new language that we have in order to better serve our students and our community. So I appreciate your time and your energy and your willingness to join with us. By the way, I got to say, it's so cool that we have one in LA and we have one in DC and two of us in KC. And so like, this is what community is about. So appreciate your time. LEC community, thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, feel free to comment. I will be sending out some information as well with the contact information with Lalo and Dr. Moreno's information. And we'll go from there. Just as an FYI, when I hit that end broadcast, everybody disappears. So if you want to hit that link again so we can just have a follow-up chat, that'd be fantastic. Anyways, thank you all, LEC community. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.